She walked onto the base like a ghost. No rank, no name, just old boots, faded fatigues, and a silence that turned heads too late. A contractor tried to send her away for unauthorized uniform wear. She didn't argue. She just turned to leave. That's when the wind lifted her shirt and a tattoo was revealed. One so secret, so buried, that an MP dropped his coffee and called a classified number not meant to be used. Within minutes, the base commander had walked out of a Pentagon briefing mid-slide. Why? Because that mark belonged to a soldier everyone thought died in 2012 who was never meant to return. Subscribe now to hear what happened when the colonel saw her face. The desert air was still cool when she stepped through the front gate of Fort Banner at exactly 600. Her boots were old black leather, worn smooth at the toes, soles quiet against the concrete. Olive drab fatigue pants hung straight and heavy around her legs, faded at the knees and sun-bleached along the seams. Her tan t-shirt clung loosely across her shoulders, sweat-stained from years of fieldwork and laundromat dryers. No unit patches, no rank, no name. Just a duffel slung over one shoulder and a gaze that never drifted. She walked with purpose, with muscle memory, like someone who didn't need directions to know where things were. No one noticed her at first. A couple of privates passed her on their way to formation, too busy checking their boots and watching the time. But near the quartermaster's bay, where a line of requisition crates waited for signatures, a civilian contractor in a reflective vest looked up from his clipboard and blinked. His name tag read Brunner. His hair was thinning at the temples, and the stripes on his vest were beginning to peel. "Ma'am?" he called, stepping into her path. "You can't be on base dressed like that." She stopped. Not startled, just still. Her expression is unreadable. Brunner adjusted his glasses and gestured toward her shirt. "The policy's pretty clear. Unauthorized wear of uniform items by civilians retired or noticent allowed on active installations." He said it the way people did when they expected a debate. When they were used to getting pushback and planned to win. She didn't argue. Didn't even speak. Just gave a slow, single nod and shifted the duffel higher on her shoulder. She turned to leave without drama, without protest. The kind of retreat that wasn't submission, just assessment. Recalculating the mission. That's when it happened. A breeze caught the edge of her shirt, lifting the hem just enough to reveal the skin at the small of her back. And for a split second, a symbol came into view etched in stark black ink across sun-worn flesh. A mark that wasn't decorative. It wasn't personal. Wasn't supposed to exist outside of sealed files and burn after reading folders. Someone a few steps behind Brunner saw it. And froze. Because they knew exactly what that tattoo meant, and who she had to be. Private First Class Ortiz had been sipping burnt coffee from a paper cup near the armory checkpoint when he saw her. At first, she was just another figure crossing his peripheral vision. Civilian cut fatigues, tan tee, regulation boots worn from real wear. He clocked her without thinking, the way MPs are trained to do. Nothing stood out. No badge, no rank, no ID lanyard around her neck. Just a woman walking like she didn't need permission. He turned back toward the entrance logs, already half-tuned out of the moment, when a gust stirred through the alley behind the quartermaster's station. Wind tugged at her shirt, and something inked into her back caught the light. Ortiz blinked. I froze. Not because it was flashy. It wasn't. Black lines, sharp and angular. A stylized raven or hawk maybe, but not quite. Its wings weren't spread in flight. They were folded downward, like shields. Below it, a geometric triangle wrapped in barbed hash marks, intersected by 3 numbers obscured partially by her shirt, but enough to read the sequence. He knew that symbol. Not from the standard regs, not from the base library. He'd seen it once, 3 years ago, when he was attached to a temporary detail for a visiting intelligence officer. The man had carried a black binder handcuffed to his wrist. No label, no rank, just a white stamp on the front. For eyes only. Ortiz hadn't been allowed to read it, but he'd seen a few pages when the officer stepped away. Tactical insignia logs, cross-references to units that didn't exist anymore or never officially had. Symbols buried in footnotes. Groups with no names, only numbers. Codes for deniable assets. That tattoo matched one of them. Exactly. His coffee hit the ground before he knew he'd dropped it. The splash barely registered. He didn't move, didn't breathe. Because in that single flash of ink, he understood something most soldiers would never be cleared to know. This wasn't just a vet in the wrong clothes. This was someone whose record had been sealed for a reason. Someone who'd come back from something that erased most who went in. And she was standing 20 feet away. Ortiz didn't hesitate. He didn't second guess. There were moments when your gut knew something before your brain had time to argue, and this was one of them. He stepped back into the shadow of the armory alcove, keyed his radio off, and pulled his personal handset from his pocket low, discreet, away from the cameras. He didn't use the chain of command. This wasn't for his squad leader. It wasn't even for the watch officer. It was for the number he'd memorized during a security rotation 6 months ago. A number he'd been told to forget the moment the detail ended. He dialed it. 3 rings. Langston's office. Came the voice on the other end. Clipped and professional. "This is PFC Ortiz, MP Post 3. I need to speak to the colonel. Immediately." There was a pause. A long one. "He's in a briefing." "I have a visual on a sigil matching code Echo, black, from the Korengal files," Ortiz said, quiet but firm. "It's live. On base. Right now." The line went silent. In the conference room 2 buildings over, Colonel Matthew Langston was midway through a situational overview with 2 Pentagon analysts and the regional logistics coordinator when his aide slipped through the door with a pale face and a folded note. Langston took one look at the paper, and the room changed. His expression didn't shift, but the light behind his eyes dropped into something colder. He folded the note slowly, slid it into his breast pocket, and stood. "Excuse me," he said, his voice too calm. "Something requires my immediate attention." The brass barely registered his departure, but the aide followed without prompting, already matching his pace as they left the building and stepped into the morning glare. "Where?" Langston asked. Quartermaster approach, civilian fatigues, no ID. Young MP saw a mark that matched. "I know what he saw," Langston said. His jaw was clenched tight enough to crack molars. "Get me eyes on her," he ordered. "Now." Because whatever Ortiz had seen, whatever ghost had walked onto his base in broad daylight wearing old boots and silence wasn't supposed to exist. And Langston had learned long ago. When the past shows up wearing skin, you don't wait to greet it. The base was never truly quiet, but something changed in the atmosphere that morning. A subtle shift. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. Radios clicked and held longer than necessary. The kind of silence that fills a room before a classified name is said out loud. The kind that doesn't need volume to carry weight. By 700, the story had spread in hushed fragments. Civilian at the quartermaster. No ID. Old boots. Something inked into her back that made a young MP go white. Someone said she wasn't in the system. Someone else said the colonel walked out of a DC briefing mid-slide deck. Near the motor pool, 3 senior NCOs stood shoulder to shoulder beneath a shade tarp, watching the barracks like something might walk out of them. "Could be nothing," one said, Staff Sergeant Callan. His voice was flat, but he didn't sound like he believed it. The oldest of the 3, First Sergeant Rivas, didn't respond right away. He lit a cigarette with hands that hadn't shaken since Kandahar. "Saw that mark once," he muttered. "In 2013. Slide buried in a red file during a counterinsurgency recap. No briefing, just a warning. If you see this, you didn't." The youngest, Sergeant Bay, frowned. "What does it mean?" Rivas exhaled smoke like steam off a deep wound. "Recon Element Sable. Call sign Ghost. 2. Operated out of Forward Base Echo, Korengal Valley, ran blackout interdiction between 3 tribal corridors. Supposed to be 10 of them. Silent insert. No extraction plan. They didn't come back? Base collapsed. April 2012. Mortar saturation followed by a secondary insurgent breach. Echo fell in less than 6 minutes. No survivors. Or so the record says. Bay looked toward the admin building where the woman had last been seen. But she's here. Rivas nodded once, like it hurt to do it. If that's her, if she made it out, then we're looking at the one person who lived through something no one was meant to survive, and came back marked by it. No one spoke for a long time. Because some ink isn't for decoration. It's for remembering what the rest of the world was told to forget. She had just stepped away from the quartermaster's overhang when the captain intercepted her starched uniform, mirrored sunglasses, a clipboard under one arm, like it meant something. He moved with the stiffness of someone who led with rank instead of presence. His name tape read Collins, fresh press, no dust. He caught up to her with an eager stride. "Ma'am," he said, sharp and clipped, "I need to see identification and authorization." She didn't break stride, just paused long enough to slide a hand into her duffel and pull out a folded envelope. It had been carried too many miles in the same crease. She held it out, steady and without expression. He took it like he expected it to validate him, flipping it open with the kind of practiced motion that usually ended a conversation. But as his eyes ran down the single sheet inside, his frown deepened. The paper was yellowed at the corners, the signature scrawled in ink that had bled slightly with time. At the bottom, Sergeant Major Henry T. Willis, Ret. Collins blinked. He knew that name old school, special warfare, the kind of man who had shaped more warriors than most academies. But the date stamped at the top was from last fall, and the Army had buried Sergeant Major Willis in January. "This isn't valid," Collins said, stiffening. "You're not in the system. There's no current directive. I'm going to have to ask you to exit the installation until proper." She didn't argue, didn't offer excuses. She simply took the letter back, folded it with the same precise care she'd used when she'd first tucked it in her bag, and turned toward the gate. 2 MPs fell into step beside her. Not hostile, just procedural. Escort protocol. But none of them noticed the man coming down the admin hall, not until the echo of his boots cut through the morning. Colonel Langston walked like gravity bowed to him. No staff, no warning, just his presence carving space into silence. The MPs slowed. Collins opened his mouth to explain, but Langston raised a hand barely. "I'll take it from here," the colonel said. And just like that, the rules changed. Colonel Langston crossed the asphalt with the kind of calm that made junior officers stand straighter without knowing why. No entourage, no clipboard, no soft-spoken aide announcing his arrival, just boots on pavement, hands behind his back, and a look that said everything worth saying had already been decided. He moved like a man with nothing to prove and everything to protect. The MPs noticed him first. They broke stride, stepping back instinctively. Captain Collins straightened, his voice catching in his throat, words lining up to explain themselves. Langston didn't even glance at him. His eyes were already locked ahead on her. She stood exactly where they'd left her, just outside the checkpoint's shadow, her back to the gate, dust settling around her boots. No resistance, no fear, just quiet. Like she'd known he'd come. And then he saw it. The wind shifted again, tugging at the hem of her shirt. Just enough. There it was, ink black, burned deep into skin weathered by time and sun. The stylized bird, its wings folded, the triangle beneath, and the numbers. Sable too. His breath hitched. He hadn't seen that mark in over a decade, not since a drone feed stitched together from grainy footage at the edge of Forward Base Echo's perimeter. A woman hauling 2 wounded over a collapsed wall. Gunfire chewing into sandbags. A last stand that wasn't supposed to succeed. She'd moved like a phantom, then vanished into smoke. Officially, everyone at Echo had died. The story had been sealed, redacted, buried under five-star signatures and political silence. But here she was, alive, breathing, standing on his base like a ghost made flesh. He stepped closer. She turned finally, eyes meeting his with the steady calm of someone who'd seen the worst of men and lived through it. Not challenging, not defensive, just there. He looked into her face and saw it beneath the age, the weathering, the silence. The same woman, the same fire. "You made it out," he said quietly. Not a question. She nodded once. That was all. And in that breath of stillness between them, something old and heavy shifted back into place. Langston didn't ask for a name. I didn't need her to explain. Some things don't need verifying, not when you've carried the weight of memory longer than the file stayed classified. He stepped in front of her, just a breath away, and looked her full in the face. The duffel still hung from her shoulder. The wind still stirred dust around her boots. But she didn't shift, didn't speak. Just waited, steady and still. The MPs were frozen in place behind him, caught between posture and instinct. Captain Collins hovered like a man trying to disappear without moving. Somewhere to the left, an admin tech stopped in the middle of a clipboard shuffle. Doors creaked open down the barracks row. Voices faltered and faded, one by one. It was like watching a storm roll in, slow and deliberate, without thunder, just pressure. Langston nodded once, a gesture that carried more than words ever could, and then he brought his right hand up in a sharp, regulation-perfect salute. The kind you give a superior. The kind that means I see you. It cut through the dry morning air like a rifle crack. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just true, formal, and unflinching. A gesture soaked in history, recognition, and something older than both. She didn't return it, not immediately. She didn't need to, because this wasn't about respect earned today. This was about something carved into her long before the rest of them showed up in pressed uniforms and rule books. Around them, silence spread. A mechanic across the lot stopped wiping grease from his hands. A pair of juniors enlisted near the PX froze mid-step. A tech sergeant stood behind the mess window, tray half-loaded, eyes wide. They didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but they knew what they were seeing. The base commander, saluting a woman in an unmarked shirt with dust on her sleeves and no ID tag around her neck. And in that moment, everything shifted. Not because she asked for it, not because she demanded it, because someone finally remembered who she was, and made sure the rest of the world did too. The office door shut with a soft click that somehow sounded final. Colonel Langston didn't sit right away. He moved behind his desk in silence, fingers brushing across the keyboard of a terminal secured behind 3 layers of clearance. No one outside that room could access what he was about to open. Most didn't even know it existed. The monitor flickered to life, a shielded network logo pulsing in blue. Langston typed quickly commands, practiced, fingers, sure. And then the file appeared. One folder, locked, redacted. Years buried beneath protocol and politics. Operation Glass Vow. Sable Team. He clicked through. Lines of black struck through whole paragraphs. Names missing. Timelines blurred. Intel sources listed as non-standard. After-action reports that stopped mid-sentence. But one item near the end of the list had survived the purge, just barely. Subject 0. Extraction asset. Status. Presumed Kia. He stared at the words like they were a name carved on a gravestone. Then he looked up. She was sitting across from him, her hands resting on her knees. Back straight, eyes steady, scarred in places, no uniform covered, no citation acknowledged, but whole. More whole than most men he'd served beside. The kind of whole that came not from healing, but from surviving anyway. She didn't speak, didn't shift in her seat, just reached slowly into the pocket of her fatigue pants and pulled out a flash drive. Black plastic, no markings except for the etched emblem on one side. The folded wing bird. Sable. She slid it across the desk without ceremony, Time to finish the record. Langston didn't ask what was on it, didn't question how she got it, or how it had survived when everything else had burned. He didn't need to. He simply picked it up and held it in his palm like it might vanish if he blinked. Outside the window, Fort Banner continued on trucks idling, boots marching, flags snapping in the wind. But in this room, time held still. Because sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with medals or debriefs. Sometimes it walks in, dust on its shoulders, and quietly hands you the missing piece of a story everyone was too afraid to finish. The memo went out quietly. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just a line added to the daily dispatch from the operations office, tucked between training rotation updates and fuel delivery schedules. Effective immediately. Veterans supporting command. Authorized training may wear legacy uniform components at the discretion of installation leadership. No explanation. No elaboration. Just policy rewritten, not debated. In the barracks, no one said her name out loud. But the story moved anyway, passed in low voices between racks, whispered during chow, folded into PT banter like a caution or a legend. The woman with the old boots, the one the colonel saluted, the one with the tattoo that didn't exist in any database. A private asked about her during weapons maintenance. Voice careful. His squad leader just shook his head, gave a slow answer. Sometimes people walk with ghosts on their back. You don't question the ones who made it out. You listen. At first, the change was small. A retired sergeant who came in to help calibrate the simulator showed up in his faded ACU boots. Nobody said a word. The staff at the motor pool started leaving hot coffee out for the volunteers before 700. Nobody was told to do it. They just did. And then came the unspoken shift, the way the junior officers hesitated before enforcing regulation to the letter, the way the gate guards checked names a little more carefully, just in case one of them wasn't supposed to be on the list, but needed to be there anyway. They didn't know the full story. Most of them never would. But they remembered the way the colonel had stood at attention, hand raised, saluting someone with no insignia, no clearance badge, no appointment on the schedule. Just dust on her shirt and a silence that held more history than any official file. Policy changed on paper, but something else shifted off the record. Respect, once demanded, had taken root instead, quiet, permanent, and no one forgot why. She ran beside them in the early morning's boots, hitting the pavement with a rhythm that never rushed, never faltered. The recruits never quite caught her pace. Not because she pushed harder, but because she didn't need to. Her movements were precise, economical. She never shouted cadence, never gave instructions unless asked. Just ran, just moved. Like a shadow that had earned its place in the light. They whispered about her in the mess hall, between sets at the range, while lacing their boots. None of them had her name. Just fragments. The one from Echo, the colonel's ghost. The one with the bird tattoo and the stare that saw through walls. No one could find her in the personnel files. And when someone asked the CO directly, he'd only said, "You'll never see her rank. Doesn't mean she doesn't outrank you." She never gave speeches, never offered war stories, but every time they faltered on a run, she was there just far enough ahead to keep them honest. Every time someone hesitated at the rope climb, or flinched at the sound of controlled fire, she was nearby. Not judging, not correcting, just there. Presence, not instruction. After the final run 4 miles in blistering heat, no shade, no brakes, she crossed the finish line first and didn't even slow. Just jogged to the edge of the track, picked up her duffel, and walked. No one called out. No one asked where she was going. They knew better. The gate guard was young, maybe 19, posture perfect, uniform sharp. He stepped back as she approached, uncertain at first, then remembering. Her eyes met his as she passed, and without thinking, he snapped to attention and saluted. She paused just long enough to nod once, just enough for her shirt to lift at the shoulder again. One last flicker of ink, black and sharp in the sun. Then she climbed into her dusty truck, turned the key, and drove toward the horizon where the desert swallowed roads and stories alike. And every soldier left standing behind her knew the truth. Real warriors don't announce themselves. They walk quietly, and never once look back.